Joining us this hour. All right. This was Austin, Texas today. Thousands of people marching through downtown Austin, Texas, ultimately converging on the state capitol today. The Austin American-Statesman reports that it was so loud outside that it was loud inside the Capitol building. In the Senate chamber and in Capitol offices, they said it was loud enough to be heard despite the fact that all these folks were outdoors. People who participated in this protest today in Austin, Texas said as the march wound its way around the Capitol and through downtown, people in Austin just started flooding out of the buildings along the route of the march and joining the march. That was Austin. This was Olympia, Washington today. This was Richmond, Virginia today. This was Trenton, New Jersey today. This was Columbia, South Carolina today. This was Sacramento. Look at this. This was Sacramento, California today. Look at that. This was Phoenix in Arizona, which is, of course, the site of the state capitol. But Arizona was one of many states today where people didn't only demonstrate at the state capitol. Arizona also, for example, had a pretty significant protest turnout in Tucson. Similarly, Pennsylvania is a state where, yes, people protested at the state capitol today in Harrisburg, but people also turned out protesting today in Pittsburgh and in Philadelphia in large numbers as well. In New York, there were protesters today at the state capitol in Albany, but in New York, there were also protesters today in Syracuse, and there were also protesters today in large numbers in New York City. There were protests today in Lansing, Michigan, and in Columbus, Ohio. Protests today in Springfield, Illinois. Protests today, large protests today in Chicago, Illinois. People turned out to protest today in the snow and bitter cold at the state capitol in the great state of Maine. And people turned out in icy, freezing rain at the state capitol in Indianapolis. There were protests today in Little Rock, Arkansas. There were protests today in Carson City, Nevada. Protests today in Concord, New Hampshire. Protests today in Salt Lake City, Utah. Protests today in Rhode Island at the Rhode Island State Capitol building. There were protests today at Hartford, Connecticut. Protests today in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Protests today in Montpelier, Vermont. Protests today at Tallahassee, the state capital in Florida. Protests also in Tampa, large protests in Tampa. Protests today in Salem, Oregon, and protests today in Atlanta, Georgia. And I could go on. But you know what? I know I missed a bunch, but I think you're getting the flavor here. There were protests absolutely all over the country today. 2.5 weeks into this new administration, protests against the destruction of the federal government, protests against what appears to be the illegal mass firing of government officials and shutdown of government agencies that they are not by law allowed to shut down. Red hot anger at these protests today about the president allowing his top campaign donor to access the sensitive personal and financial and apparently now health-related information about all American citizens that is held in government computer systems. Him handing that information over to his top campaign donor, apparently without restriction and without regard to law. I mean, forgive me, but whatever genius strategists are telling people who are opposed to Trump, oh, hold your fire. Nobody's going to be upset yet. Nobody's going to be upset yet about what they're doing to immigrants and what they're doing to trans people and shutting off foreign aid. None of these are popular issues. Nobody's going to care about giving the president's top donor all your private information without your consent. Nobody's going to care about these kinds of things, so don't complain yet. We'll complain later. Yeah. Any genius armchair strategists giving that kind of advice to the country right now, allow me to suggest that they are not in touch with how real people really do feel about what really is just a lawless blitzkrieg in these first 2.5 weeks of this new Trump term. The protests all over the country in red states and blue states, coast to coast today, these aren't even the first. These protests today follow the big protests against immigration arrests and deportations that happened this weekend, including protests that shut down a major freeway in Los Angeles. They follow this really quite large and quite dramatic, no notice, impromptu, dramatic protest at the U.S. Treasury building in Washington last night. Like all these protests we're covering in the past few days, this came together on very, very short notice. I say it was effectively impromptu. This protest at Treasury was not announced until Sunday night, for it to happen less than 48 hours later in Washington at the Treasury building. By the time it came together last night, there literally were thousands of people, and there were dozens of members of Congress as well. Crowd shouting there, "Shut down the Senate," meaning Democrats should use the power that they have in the Senate to shut that down as a means of trying to stop or slow down or at least complicate the worst of what Trump is trying to do. And maybe that sounds like an extreme tactic, but even our usually shy major news outlets are starting to run little headlines here and there, raising a teeny tiny flag or two that everything they're doing appears to be quite illegal. I mean, this was the New York Times and the Washington Post simultaneously today. In the Times, Trump brazenly defies laws in escalating executive power grab. In the Post, U.S. government officials privately warn Musk's blitz appears illegal. Yeah, I don't know how private and quiet these supposed warnings are at this point. They're not even warnings, they're just descriptions of what's happening. I mean, that same article from the Washington Post quotes an expert saying, quote, "So many of these things are so wildly illegal that I think they're playing a quantity game and assuming the system can't react to all this illegality at once." That's not a private warning that there might be some illegality coming down the road. That's a red alarm. That is a red alarm screaming in the night. Everything they're doing is illegal. Well, one way to react to that is for the opposition to start shutting down everything they can to try to stop it. That has been the message to elected Democrats from many of their constituents this week. Now, tonight, Chuck Schumer, the Democratic leader in the Senate, says that he does want all Democrats to now start doing everything they can to block all Trump nominees. He had not previously said that. As of today, that's what he's saying. And he is the leader of the Senate Democrats. Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut, a progressive, who had nevertheless previously voted for a couple of Trump's nominees. Now, Senator Murphy says tonight that that's over, telling the Times, quote, "It would not help us to be working with Republicans at the very moment the Constitution is being lit on fire. This moment demands some extraordinary tactics." He will not support anybody else who is being nominated to join this administration. The extraordinary tactics he's talking about tonight include this. This is happening right now on the U.S. Senate floor. And this is going to be a scene that you're going to see all night long, because Democrats plan to hold the Senate floor all night long tonight to protest the pending confirmation of a Trump nominee named Russell Vogt. That's him. He's the guy who wrote Project 2025. He's the Trump nominee who masterminded the whole idea of just cutting off government funding for things that Congress funded, even though that's illegal. That, of course, set the stage for Trump's top donor, Elon Musk, to personally assert that he has the right to illegally stop payments going out of the U.S. Treasury because he doesn't like them. That whole idea came from Russell Vogt saying the president doesn't have to follow the law about government money. Senator Brian Schatz of Hawaii is leading this all-night-long filibuster in the Senate right now and overnight tonight against the confirmation of Russell Vogt. Brian Schatz is going to step off the Senate floor and join us live here in just a few minutes. You will want to see that interview. I should tell you that the Senate is already in a ruckus as Americans are flooding it with calls demanding answers about what Trump is doing. And I don't just say that as like a term of, I don't just mean that as like the idiomatic way. People are, making calls. I mean, we've got really specific metrics that show that people really, really are making calls. Look at this from Republican Senator Lisa Murkowski today, who said the usual call volume coming into the U.S. Senate is about 40 calls a minute. Wow, sounds like a lot. 40 calls a minute. Right now, it's 1,600 calls a minute. She said that in a post apologizing to her constituents that her staff is having a hard time getting back to everybody. The Associated Press reported today that basically no one's getting through as they are calling Senate offices because the call volume of complaints is so massive. The AP further reporting that Republican senators in particular have just had their systems, their phone systems, completely swamped. That's on the Senate side. Over on the House side, it's dramatic there too. I don't know if you saw this headline today, but the drama on the House side today included this. Look at this, quote, 2 Democratic lawmakers, Congresswoman Judy Chu of California and Gwen Moore of Wisconsin, barged into House Speaker Mike Johnson's office unscheduled today and challenged him about Elon Musk's team gaining access to a sensitive payment system at the Treasury Department. Their intrusion comes amid an escalation of Democratic backlash against Musk's sweep through the federal government. These congresswomen barged in, quote, shortly after Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent arrived at the Speaker's office. Bessent gave members of Musk's so-called Department of Government Efficiency access to the Treasury payment system last weekend. That system controls trillions of dollars in payments for Social Security, tax refunds, and myriad other government functions. Congresswoman Judy Chu told reporters about how it happened today. She said, quote, Gwen Moore forced her way in there, and then I got to go in right behind her. She said, quote, and she was already confronting Speaker Johnson about Treasury Secretary Bessent and the stealing of Americans' private information, tax information that should never be stolen and given to this billionaire Elon Musk. Gwen Moore forced her way in there. Then I got to go in right behind her. How rude. It's terrible. And the pushback continues to take many forms, including some unexpected ones. Today we did get a new lawsuit filed by one of the National Labor Relations Board members who Trump illegally fired this past week. It looks like we're about to get another lawsuit filed by somebody else who Trump illegally fired from the EEOC. Today, another federal judge blocked this sort of wildly, brazenly unconstitutional gambit from Trump's first day to declare the 14th Amendment to the Constitution to be null and void, saying it's no longer true that if you're born here, you're an American. At the end of a court hearing on this matter this morning, this federal judge just ruled right then and there in her Maryland courtroom. She said, quote, Trump's executive order conflicts with the plain language of the 14th Amendment. It contradicts a 125-year-old binding Supreme Court precedent. And it runs counter to our nation's 250-year history of citizenship by birth. The judge said, quote, no court in the country has ever endorsed the president's interpretation. This court will not be the first. And see. Tomorrow is the deadline, tomorrow midnight, for extra drama. Is the deadline issued by Trump and his top donor, Elon Musk, telling millions of federal workers they need to resign their jobs by tomorrow midnight or else. There's been pretty incredible organizing around this. Federal workers essentially warning each other in detail and with receipts that what Musk and Trump are offering people to try to get them to resign is actually something it's illegal for them to offer. There's now been a major federal lawsuit filed as of today to stop the resign or else threats from being effectuated tomorrow at midnight. So that is worth watching over the course of tomorrow to see whether that essentially is enjoined to stop Trump and Musk from going through with those resign or else threats to federal workers. But I said some of the pushback is happening in unexpected ways. I will say one of the things that happened today happened at the General Services Administration, GSA. One of Musk's guys held a video meeting with a whole division of employees at the GSA. And Musk's guy was telling them at this video meeting, this video conference, that they really ought to consider this fork in the road offer, that's what they're calling it, this fork in the road offer that demands their resignations and threatens them if they don't do it. In this video conference with Musk's guy, the employees there at GSA responded, I don't know, am I allowed to say they responded beautifully? Is that okay? Quote, his assurances did not appear to work. Employees in the division then rained down spoon emojis in the chat that accompanied the video meeting, which was watched by more than 600 people, according to photos of the chat screen provided to the Times and 3 people familiar with the reaction. Some employees then added spoon emojis to their statuses on Slack. Oh, you want us to take your fork in the road? Oh, you do? You think we should take this fork in the road? How about fork you? Here's 1 million spoon emojis. They think people are just going to roll over and go along with them while they destroyed the government? Really? People weren't going to get mad and also get creative and also laugh in your face? Fork in the road. The one place that they really have done everything they can to just destroy a part of the government, even though it's illegal for them to do so, is, of course, at USAID, which does foreign aid. And there's different arguments about this. I think presumably they started there and they went for their most radical action there because they figured that Americans wouldn't care, because they figured that this was not going to be an issue that Americans thought was an important thing. This is something that, only Beltway elites would care about, and their voters, people in the heartland, they definitely wouldn't care because obviously it has nothing to do with them. How's that working out? Here's News Channel 12, KWCH in Wichita, Kansas.
The Kansas Farmers Union warns that disruptions to this program could eliminate an entire market for Kansas farmers. The initiative sends excess crops like wheat and sorghum to food insecure regions worldwide.
It'll certainly be an economic hit to Kansas farmers. USAID purchases about $2 billion worth of commodities that are grown not just here in Kansas, but across the country every year.
Kansas farmers freaking out about this because where do you think American food aid comes from? Does it come from Mars? No, we do not occupy Mars. No, American food aid largely comes from a place called America, where Americans live. The Associated Press has been all over this week, reporting that what Trump and Rubio and Musk have done already with this foreign aid gambit has already stuck literally hundreds of millions of dollars worth of food and medicine that has already been delivered to ports abroad, but it's sitting stuck in ports and it can't be unloaded because nobody knows what these clowns are doing. And they tried to do this with a stroke of a pen and no planning. That includes American-grown food sold to the program by American farmers. Kansas Republican Senator Jerry Moran among those freaking out about the perishable American-grown food that is now sitting there to rot, with all the American farmers and contractors who supply these programs being told, how great it is that Elon's feeding this part of the U.S. government to the wood chipper, and shouldn't we all be cheering that? At just one trade association in the D.C. area, contractors have reportedly racked up $350 million in unpaid bills already, just since they stopped the foreign aid. The estimated job losses in the United States, just to contractors who supply these specific programs. The job loss in the United States is thought to be about 52,000 jobs. These are people who are not government employees. These are people who work in the private sector. Right? They keep saying, private sector jobs are the only ones that count. If you work for the federal government, that's a low productivity job. You ought to resign. You ought to get out or else. Well, here's 52,000 people who work in the private sector who Trump has just thrown out of a job. 52,000 Americans who have contract jobs related to this one agency and its programs, which they tried to blow up, again, just by saying so, even though it's illegal and even though they rolled it out with zero planning. I mean, please. Even if you don't consider, even if you don't consider stuff like this, capital city of Uganda, right? This is not like backcountry. This is a big cosmopolitan city. Lots of traffic in and out. It's the capital city of a large country. Capital city of Uganda, Kampala, is having its first Ebola epidemic in years right now. And there is a U.S. team there that would be leading the response to Ebola so it doesn't spread, and among other things, come here. That Ebola team in Uganda has just been axed with no warning as Uganda is having a brand new Ebola epidemic. Does that seem smart? Even if you don't consider the fact that one of the teams just axed by Trump and Rubio and Musk with no warning is the US team that designs really highly specialized treatment regimes for individual patients who have multi-drug resistant tuberculosis. Why do you need to do that? You need to do that because you don't want multi-drug resistant tuberculosis to overrun the globe. Right? The people who are designing specialized treatment regimes for people with potentially the most dangerous pathogen in the world axed with no warning, stop work. And by the way, you can't even access your email or any of your files. Do you think that makes the people who actively have multi-drug resistant tuberculosis right now somehow magically stop work on that too? I mean, even if you don't consider just the deep stupidity of cutting people and programs like that, there's also plainly a political miscalculation here. A miscalculation that we, the people, are also stupid, and we're also mean, and we won't get it, right? And we won't care. That's why they went after USAID and foreign aid first. They were clearly wrong about that. I mean, this was the huge, basically spontaneous protest that broke out at the USAID building on Monday, when Trump ordered the building shut overnight on Sunday night. And look at this. This was today. This was today. In the shadow of the US Capitol, in the cold, again on zero notice, as Americans protested simultaneously in 50 state capitals and cities all over the country, yet more people, look at this, thousands of people turned up today in Washington on zero notice to try to save USAID, to stand up for foreign aid. And tons of Democratic officials showed up as well.
Make no mistake about it, Elon Musk's effort to dismantle the Agency for International Development is a gift to China, it's a gift to Russia, it's a gift to our adversaries around the world.
Who the hell does Musk think he is? He has absolutely no right in shutting down USAID. We cannot allow that. We've got to take to the streets, we've got to take to the rallies, we've got to fight back, and we must resist every motion, every action by Musk and Trump to shut down this government. In the Congress, we must equally resist what is happening. We cannot let it go on. We must resist, we must be in the streets, we must take every possible action to stop what is happening. Don't just show up here. They're not choosing. I'm with community health centers today in Virginia. They're getting shut down in red parts of the state and blue parts of the state. We're only going to break this when we have Republicans willing to stand up as well. Put the pressure not just on us, but on everyone, every elected official level. That's the only way we're going to win this.
This is a big day today. I mean, that was Washington. After what I just showed you at the top of what was happening in all 50 states in the country simultaneously. Oh yeah, don't protest now. Keep your powder dry. I think people are plenty mad already. They're taking as much ground as they can, as fast as they can. They're seeing what gets them pushback. You know what gets them pushback? All the things they thought would be easy. There's another protest tomorrow against their attack on foreign aid, specifically on the HIV programs, tomorrow at the State Department building at 11 a.m. It's all happening at once. Samantha Power, who ran USAID under President Biden, she's here next. Stay with us.